there's just a wealth of knowledge that's not been shared at all by design, but then also when people are just so disconnected, it's just the whole out of sight, out of mind. Had I gone to a farm that was actually doing it the right way, I would have never been vegan. I spent most of my life not caring at all, but now I can't unsee it all. I believe most of our humans' problems is our disconnection from our food.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Today we have with us a special guest, Ryan Griggs, with something called Regenaissance. And I guess to me, it sounds like a combination of the word Renaissance and regenerative. So I'm sure that's what that's about. So maybe tell me a little bit about your background and what got you the idea to develop something like that.
Yeah, so it actually is those two words put together. I'm not smart enough for the one to come up with that. My good friend was. But for me, so I'm 31 now, and I didn't speak to it because it's all about farming and ranching and really reconnecting us back to our food. It's a media-based company. And I didn't speak to a farmer until I was 27, even though I'm from Southern Indiana. I was literally surrounded by cornfields, but I was just so disconnected from all of that. And me, like probably most Americans, our wake-up call was really forced on us. So it was before the pandemic, but really happened as the pandemic started, to where my older brother had stage 3 colon cancer, and that I knew when receiving that news that if that would progress to stage 4, I'd go be his caretaker. In September of 2020, we're told it's in remission. And so I go back home and, celebrate and all of that. 2 months later, we're told not only is it back, but it's progressed to stage 4. So I still to this day have no idea how they messed that up, to where you went from stage 3 to all of a sudden it's clear, to all of a sudden now it's not only back, but it's at the worst stage. So I go back, be his caretaker for the first 6 months of 2021, which was absolutely horrific. The first 2.5 of those months was in the room with him, and then the final 2.5 months was in the hospital. So I really got to see that whole world too, and how much of a hell it is for really everybody involved. Unfortunately, watched that take his life 3 days before his 33rd birthday. And on top of all of that, my mom was also really sick. She had a laundry list of health issues that she was on all kinds of meds for. So diabetes, medications for that, anxiety, depression, medications for that, psoriasis, shingles, gout, sleep apnea, coronary artery disease, so the most common heart disease. Her kidney and liver were failing and needed transplants for both, but because of her heart condition, she was deemed inoperable. And then in total, she ended up having 14 liters of fluid drained from her lungs. So she just massively suffered too. Because that's how I say it. Even after the day my brother died, pretty much my hell had just started. So I quit my job. I used to work for IBM in Austin. Did not know what the hell I was going to do, but essentially, this is where Twitter really came into play. Because again, this was at 2021, and actually, I started finding out all of what Maha is about. I found that part of Twitter somehow. So I was really learning and unlearning a lot, because also at the time, Shawn, I was vegan. When I was taking care of my brother, I was very strict vegan and all of that. And Twitter woke me up to realize I needed animal protein. And so I started making a lot of changes through all of that. But then fast forward to February of 2022, I found regenerative agriculture on Twitter. And then that was my light bulb moment of, again, the realization of I'm 27 and I've never spoken to a farmer. What is going on here? And so by the end of that year, I was working on a farm. And so I just started sharing that out on Twitter. And I remember I shared my story and what I had plans to. I had a GoPro, and I was just going to really write about what I was doing, and really as my way to help bridge this massive gap, because only 1.5% of the people produce food for the 100%. And that story blew up, and I realized that I had something here, to where COVID woke a lot of people up to some of these things. And so I was just going to continue on with that. But then also I had my own health hell of a journey, to where I had undiagnosed Hashimoto's. None of the healthcare that I was using did anything to help me. Actually, an 18-year-old kid from Mexico that I hired from Twitter, he had me take a bunch of independent tests that not a single doctor had me take. And I learned what I had pretty quickly after that, which was pretty infuriating, given 18 months and thousands of dollars spent from American healthcare. But fast forward to 2023, I had plans to work on this farm in Montana. And 1 week before that, I started taking B1, a supplement for that, because I was just deficient in everything. Because it makes sense whenever you're in a severe situation like taking care of your brother through all of that, your body depletes everything. And so I was really starting to figure out how to address all of that. And for some reason, I had this horrific reaction to this supplement to where over the course of 5 days, I went to the bathroom about 90 times, all bloody, had the worst abdominal pains of my life. And I was by myself in this Airbnb loft. Not knowing what the heck to do, I realized that my only two options were urgent care or ER. And so I told myself on a Saturday morning that I'm going to go to the ER. And right as I was about to head there, I had to head straight to the bathroom again. And because my body is still in default fight or flight mode, I sleep with rain sounds. And I remember as I was sitting on the bathroom that I started profusely sweating, thinking I'm going to throw up. But then my eyes were closing in, my ears, the sounds were getting muffled, and I realized I was passing out. And so it was happening so fast, but I didn't know why I was passing out. So I thought if I pass out here, I could literally die because no one was around. So I learned that you could talk yourself out of not passing out and went straight to the ER. Was fortunately able to get in. They did a bunch of tests. They said I had inflamed colon, but didn't give me like a really official diagnosis, but to go back to Austin. And so I did that immediately. And now this is pretty much, February of 2023. I did colonoscopy, endoscopy, everything at, I forgot which one in Austin, one of the bigger ones. And they told me that there might have been ulcerative colitis, but they still didn't give me an official diagnosis. Just that I had a really inflamed colon. So I told myself, okay, I'm just going to recover in the spring in Austin and then try to continue back to my journey, because I had farms lined up in Italy and I was going to travel the world of working on farms, showing what they do there. And that would just be my way of trying to get people to wake up and care about where their food comes from. As I was recovering, I was on a walk in a park in North Austin, and like a meteor just hit me of this idea of Regenaissance, to where initially starting out as an apparel brand, because there's no cool looking apparel at all related to agriculture. And since we're so troubled by nature, I figured that that could be my way of building some type of grassroots movement through all of that. And so I had my launch date set for May 28th, which was Memorial Day. And through all of this, my mom's health was getting worse and worse. And actually Mother's Day, I realized that 2023 was going to be her last year on earth. And through all of this, she really declined rapidly cognitively. And she was the one that always would text and call me, but that really flipped. But I remember that weekend before I launched, she reached out to see my website and everything, which I thought was awesome, but also strange. And now I realize why, because 2 days later I launched, an amazing reception. I had no plans of ever starting my own business, and I did it less than 90 days. But then 4 hours after I launched, my aunt calls me, and I knew right away what that meant. So my mom actually passed away on the day I launched Regenaissance. But through the long-winded answer for all of that, the whole reason why I'm so focused on farming and ranching too, it's one, it saved my life, but two, it's the more I learn and speak with farmers and ranchers, because like I said, I'm on the road right now visiting farms and ranches, the more I realize how little help they have, how little people know what's going on, and how disastrous that is for long-term for our food system. And so, I know that was a very long-winded answer, but I feel like that context is necessary.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff in there, and sorry about your brother and your mom. I mean, it's tragic, and we're seeing a sort of a explosion in colon cancer in younger folks. I mean, that's 30. I think you said 31 is just tragically. I mean, any age is tragic, but especially that young. And then I'm just kind of curious. You said you started out doing a vegan diet. What led you down that road? Was that an attempt to help with your health, or were you concerned about animal welfare, or what was it? What was the reason for that?
Yeah, it was definitely animal welfare. Because growing up, my dream job was to be a veterinarian. And I remember in grad school, I took a class studying orangutans at the Indianapolis Zoo. And that really, the first half of that semester, the whole zoo was closed. So we actually had the exhibit to ourselves. And then I just saw human nature essentially for the second half of that, and just seeing how we interacted with the animals, and they clearly did not like it either. And they actually liked hanging around me and the other classmates because we were the only ones that gave them respect. So that made me really start thinking about just how we view ourselves and just also just animals. I took the ignorant path, not looking down the animal protein route, and I just figured, hey, I could thrive and survive as a human without that. And so I didn't really take the deep dive into that. But looking back, it was definitely because I was disconnected from my food. Had I gone to a farm that was actually doing it the right way, I would have never been vegan. And so that's also why I believe most of our humans' problems is our disconnection from our food.
Well, I mean, certainly a lot of the health problems uh, originate in our diet for sure. I'm convinced of that as well. Um, you'd mentioned a questionable diagnosis of ulcerative colitis and stuff like that. Assume you're better from that now, correct? And if so, how did you do it?
Definitely better. I'm still having some challenges with the stress aspect because I know that's huge to have to manage with Hashimoto's. But essentially, I just really stuck to a pretty simple diet of meat, whatever meat I would want. Typically lower fat though, because I also noticed I was having gallbladder issues. I couldn't figure out why I was having trouble digesting higher fat foods. Because I ate a lot of steak. I love steak, but I remember eating a really fattier piece, and hours after, I was just struggling. And I also noticed when I have something like a New York strip that currently I feel much better. But then simple with fruit, raw honey, and usually I just pay attention to the foods that really mess me up rather than don't. Um, and then sometimes raw milk. And depending on where the source is, I can notice if that affects me right now or not either.
Yeah, interesting. Now, when you, I guess, first reintroduced red meat and steak in your diet, because I mean, as a vegan, you would probably that would have been probably the last thing you'd be wanting to eat. How did you feel about that? Were you already mentally at a point where you're like, hey, it's the vegan sort of ideology and animal rights sort of discussion, because animal welfare and animal rights are very different things. I think the vegans sort of focus on animal rights, whereas, as you know, ranchers are interested in animal welfare, which is a different topic. How did that? Well, I mean, did you like, I just want to eat a steak, or was there some trepidation when you started that?
It's tough because that was at the time when my brother just passed away. So I was just floating, barely existing in life. But I will say at the time, my problem with all of that was I had really bad problem with marijuana because that was just my way of escaping. And so pairing that with food, I just started essentially emotionally eating, and it went that route to where I was just eating junk food. Did not eat a healthy diet at all for, I would say, 4 to 6 months after.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's obviously, and then your mom's sick at the same time. So tell me a little bit more. So the Regenaissance is what exactly? I mean,
Yeah.
what is your vision of what that means? I mean, I can see people saying, "Hey, we need to return to more of a historic way of raising food." I mean, some people are proponents of that. Other people say, "Well, how are we going to feed everybody if we do that?" What does it mean to you? Hey, folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly.
So it's a media news company because I write a lot on what's going on within the news. I feel like I'm barely even keeping up trying to read what's all going on because there's just so much constantly doing that. But then the second piece of the media. So currently I am about 1.5 months down on this 5.5 month trip of visiting farms and ranches around the country for two main things: to really share stories, because for getting folks to care about where their food comes from, especially if you're in your 50s or 60s and all you've done is buy food from your grocery store. If I tell them to go visit a farm and support them, they might be like, yeah, but that's not going to really nudge them to actually go do that. So it's a 0 to 1 game of trying to get folks to actually take the initiative. And so for me, stories can be a way to really help wake people up. And so I'm wanting to go around and really, there's just a wealth of knowledge that's not been shared at all by design. But then also when people are just so disconnected, it's just the whole out of sight, out of mind. But then also help educating on what actually it takes to start your own ranch or farm, and what it actually takes to continue on doing this, especially in today's society, to where it's already very difficult to make it by as a farmer or rancher. And then lastly, it's raising awareness too, because there's just so much corruption there. I'm going later to South Dakota. They're Heather and Charles Maud. They're this awesome ranching family. They've had this same piece of land in their family since the 1910s. And at the end of one of their fence lines is a National Forest Service tree. And they had an anonymous complaint from a hunter last year stating that the fence line was actually overbearing and actually in for the National Forest Service tree. And within 90 days, each Heather and Charles were facing up to 10 years in prison, $250,000 in fines, placed on the gag order, threatened to take their weapons away, threatened to have their children taken away. And they're just like, what is going on? And then you're looking back into, there's just a lot of nefarious things for the powers that be trying to essentially push them out. Fortunately, this caught wind online and social media, and really a lot of awesome ranchers in the back end were helping spread the word. It finally got its way to Secretary of Ag Brooke Rollins and Donald Trump, and they dismissed the case. But there's just stuff like that constantly going around. And so I'm just trying to bring that to the limelight, be the microphone for them, because again, most people have no idea what's going on, but how could I get them to care? And it's really to just show what's going on, show what they're doing, and humanizing it all too. Because that's another thing. Whenever it's out of sight, out of mind, there's no human face to where your food's coming from anymore. And so I wouldn't care either. I mean, I didn't. That's kind of why I'm so passionate now. I spent most of my life not caring at all, but now I can't unsee it all.
Well, I mean, as you probably are aware, I mean, there are thousands of ranches that go under every year in this country, and now we're seeing like companies, like there's one, like Bill Gates is backing some company to make butter out of, chemicals, basically carbon and methane, and, just trying to make it out of gases, basically, just doing the chemistry on that in the lab. And so they are, there's obviously forces that are out there that would love to get rid of most farmers and ranchers and feed us out of factories completely, which is in my view, in many ways, an abomination, and we can't allow that to happen. Yeah, and I'd heard of that South Dakota. I mean, I'd kind of saw some of that on social media where it had been dismissed. I didn't know the details on that, but outside, I mean, obviously there's a lot of tragic stories happening. So what are the scope of the things you like to talk about? Obviously, like, hey, we need to point out when there's kind of craziness like that South Dakota case, but what else is out there to learn about?
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, I guess for one instance, pigs. I'm currently learning so much on just pigs because we have so many misconceptions on how pigs are. We see them as these dirty, vile creatures in a lot of ways that are riddled with parasites, which it's very easy to think on that considering how destroyed that industry is. But just how incredibly smart they are, really learning about the history too, because a lot of these farms I visited, like J&L Green Farm, he's a forest raised pig farmer, but just talking with him on how the Appalachian used their massive hog droves in the 1800s. There's just so much history of how we even got to where we're at now from our food system standpoint, and just thinking of the logistics of it all. That's what I really like hearing from the farmers and ranchers, because that's another thing too. It's modern society, we view agriculture, but then also just our ancestors as just not very bright people. And that's just not true at all. Especially with agriculture, to where you already forced to wear so many different hats, not just actually raising food. Their ingenuity shows whenever you go visit and just ask questions, and they showcase just what they're doing. And so that's why I like it too, because it just really gets you to think about things that we haven't thought about. Again, that's kind of why I say our disconnection from our food is our whole existence as humans. We've always been close to our food, and this is the first time we never really have been, which is funny because this is the most advanced we've ever been. And so that's kind of just the interesting dichotomy of all of that. So that's also why I have these stories from them, is there's just a wealth of knowledge to where they don't really share that out to anybody. And so you can be that, I guess, microphone or resource, or I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but you can be that person to talk with them on that.
You mentioned like the issue with hogs and pigs, and I think there's a fellow by the name of Greg Gunthorpe. If you're not familiar with him, he's he's a pig farmer that I've interviewed that has a lot of insight into that stuff. And I think it's something like, correct me if I'm wrong, by something like 94% of all the pig operations are owned by Smithfield, which is a Chinese-run company, and they basically put all the independent pig farmers out of business over the last 30, 40 years, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tragic what's happening in that industry. And same thing with the chickens and the cows. The beef industry is still a little bit independent, but as you know, 80+% of that is run by the four packing companies. Are you looking at some of the legislative initiatives? I know like Massey's got his Prime Act, and there's been a few others, trying to reinstitute the cool country of origin labeling laws and a few other things, and try to get better processing access for the small independent guys. Does that get on your radar? Maybe a guy named Mike Calicrate who's Ranch to Direct Foods. I've talked to all these guys over the years. I've been doing this for a long time, and I just wonder if you interact much with those types of folks.
Yeah, those are awesome. I'm glad you mentioned Greg. He's actually the first person I visited on this trip. It's crazy when you mention the Cool Act. It's just crazy the fact that doesn't even exist, to where we still have imported meats labeled as product of USA. And now we've reached the point to where it's up to 19% of our total beef consumption is imported beef. But that's why it's very difficult to not know behind closed doors how much will even ever get done because of the powers that be. So I try to stay up to date on all of that, but I also try to focus on what I can, because it seems like that whole world is just so far out of reach from where I'm at. Because even whenever you mention on true statistics alone, because to me, the beef industry is the only one left standing and one that's going to be attacked a lot. Because since 1980, we have lost 91% of total pig farms, 89% of total dairies, and 52% of total beef cattle operations. And so everything continues to be more centralized. And with the beef, we're at the lowest inventory since the 50s. And because I see more and more people talking on the price of steak now, but not understanding why. That's the biggest reason why. It's the supply and demand, and a steak is usually one of the most sought out cuts of a beef. So whenever we have such low inventory, that's going to happen. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of that, I think most people attribute that to the drought we've had for the last 5-6 years is driving the beef supply down to those historically low levels. There's usually, at least historically, there's cycles, and I know a lot of the ranchers right now they're amazed at how much their animals are now worth, because the supply is so tight. So, let me ask you about as far as you said starting a ranch or starting your own. I mean, a lot of people do a little homesteading. They'll get some chickens and rabbits and, maybe some ducks and things like that to start that stuff. How, do you have any idea of how many people are doing this now? Is it a significantly growing thing, or is it just a few kind of oddball people out there living off the land? And is that actually growing in significance, or do you even know?
It's definitely growing. The challenge, though, is how many are staying, because that's what I also try to do. What I'm doing is showcasing and painting the full picture, because a lot of it with getting off the grid and, raising some chickens gets very sensationalized online. And so I know there'll be people that start their own homestead, not truly understanding what they're getting themselves into, and then quitting a year or two later. So I know it's both, to where a lot of people are starting to take more initiatives, but then there's also people that it will only last a year and then they stop. But I will say backyard chickens and gardening and all of that is definitely starting to grow, which is a great first step.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of people that are they don't realize how hard it is to produce food. I'm not trying to do that. I mean, I just don't have the time right now, but it's a definitely commitment. One of the things, and this is interesting because, when you do things at scale, you're more efficient. I mean, that's just the way it is. And that's why some people have decided, hey, we need to do these large operations because it's just more efficient. It costs less. It's more productive per unit of input. Um, and yet there's a danger of everything becomes centralized and like for instance, I don't know if you get it, there's a lot of criticism around, glyphosate as a herbicide, as a desiccant, and things like that. And it's ubiquitously used here in the US. And, as much as I'm a proponent of a carnivore diet, I don't see us not having agriculture, plant agriculture. We're still going to be, raising wheat and corn and soybeans and whatever the heck else, strawberries and tomatoes and stuff like that. How do we, because I think before that, I think they were using something like paraquat, which I think was far worse. I think glyphosate was actually a step up from my understanding. And again, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but how do you see agricultural in the sense that you can feed as many people as we need to feed? Maybe say, hey, look, in America, we're going to feed Americans. We're not worried about feeding Europe and South America and the Middle East like we kind of do. What do we have to do for that?
It's a great question. And then also, before answering your question on the paraquat, that's the interesting thing about when people mention glyphosate so much. There are thousands and thousands of more chemicals that are far, far, far worse than glyphosate. And that's not even me being a proponent of glyphosate. That whole world is a absolute mess. And that's on just trying to even solve the whole using sprays is very complex. I mean, that's the whole conventional versus, I guess, regenerative conversation. But to solve that, it's interesting because Will Harris, he's made statements stating that he doesn't believe regenerative is scalable, but then you'll have other regenerative farmers, pushing back. But to me, what we should be thinking of is how can we just make it a viable option to where we could have Will Harris operations state every state, because that's the biggest challenge right now. It's not even really a viable option financially for a lot of farmers and ranchers, which is why we're seeing so many closing down at the rates we've seen. So to me, you have to solve that problem first. Is how can we even make it a financially viable option? Because now, when talking on people getting new people getting into this space, especially the younger generations, it's very challenging because now you have wanting to be YouTube stars and Twitch streamers and everything with online, but not actually doing things outside with your hands. It's as laborious as raising your own food. So I know that's not a great answer, but to me, it's how can we make carbon copies of Will Harris around every state? Because if we could do that, then I think we could easily solve the problem of providing enough food for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to most of the regenerative including Will. I've talked to Will a couple times. I've talked to Alan Savory, and I've talked to Joel Salatin, Greg Judy, and gosh, just about everyone you can think of in the regenerative space that's been fairly popular over the years. I mean, guys like Alan Williams out at Joyce Farms down in Alabama I think he's very pro scalability. He thinks it's scalable. And so it's interesting to see those conversations being made. Thoughts on I've seen, and maybe you're aware of this more than I have. I've just kind of heard a little bit about trying to give immunity from prosecution to like pesticide manufacturers, kind of like the vaccine manufacturers were given immunity because they're saying, well, we're growing food and we have to feed everybody, and if a few people die because of that, that's just the way it is. Do you have any more insight into what's going on with that stuff?
I know that they were trying to do it federally, and I know that it was. See, that's a good question. I've not stayed top on the one federally because I know statewide there's a few states like Georgia to where they passed it. I don't know where they're at currently though federally, because I know it was looking like it was going to pass, but then it caught wind a lot online, and it looked like that someone tried to squeeze it in the bill. But I need to actually go back because I haven't checked in the last few days. Because it is, if that would be passed, that would be out of a lot of stuff that would be one that's pretty disgusting. Because billions and billions of dollars already been paid out in settlements, and there's a lot more already being on trial. And the evidence is pretty clear on what this is causing. But then I'm also the proponent of, if we outright ban glyphosate overnight, that would be pretty disastrous too. And so that's also why just the whole transparency and education and communication just needs to be there. And it feels like that's never there, whether it be by design or not. But with something with these chemical sprays, it's very challenging because it's very easy for a consumer to get mad at a farmer that's spraying crops, but then go be a farmer that is go do what he's trying to do for even a week, and then multiply that to a year. And I think your opinion would change of that.
Well, I'm just wondering, because my understanding is glyphosate is restricted in Europe. I don't think it's outright banned, but I think it's pretty restricted. What are they using over there? Do you know? And I mean, because obviously they're growing food over there and they're feeding a population of several 100 million people. I assume they're still using chemical pesticides. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, they are. And that's another thing too. That's whenever we continue to use us versus Europe, especially with those chemicals, to me, it's just the easy thing to say online now, because they definitely use sprays.
Yeah. Okay. How, so, I mean, you said, are you actually growing food right now yourself personally?
No, just because I'm literally on the road for these 6 months. Once I do finally have time to settle down, because I'm also doing this again next year, essentially going to be on the road most of the year. But long term, I want to ranch and I'll be growing my own produce, but then raising my own bison.
And you're going to do that in presumably Texas, or where are you going to do it? I know there's some bison ranches in Texas.
That's a good question. I'm not too sure on that part yet.
Do you have any help in all this stuff that you're doing, or is this a one-man job?
No, I've got some help. That was for the longest time. It was me and just one other person. But like for this road trip, I've got a videographer with me, and it's been pretty cool to see him too, because he's never really visited farms. So seeing all the questions he's asking, it's been really interesting to see from an actual consumer that's never really been involved with all of this.
Let me ask you, because there's a lot of vegan propaganda films around agriculture, Cowspiracy, I don't know. Every one of them has some sort of, cow farmers are out there smacking cows in the head with sledgehammers and kicking them in the face. And, and I don't know how much you were influenced by that as a vegan at point, but when you started going to ranches and seeing agriculture and meeting ranchers and farms and growing your food, what did you learn that you thought was a vegan, which was perhaps not actually true?
It's why I say, had I gone to the actual farms beforehand, I would have never gone vegan, because I had actually never watched any of those documentaries. They didn't really influence me, but I know that's what's influenced most vegans. I mean, they're just wrong about everything about how they view the farmer and rancher. Kind of going back to what you said with animal welfare. Farmers and ranchers will be the ones out 2 or 3 a.m. in the barn with one of the sick animals. They'll be out in the fields in the rain, snow, what have you, to take care of their animals. They will weep whenever they lose an animal. And sure, there might be from some financial aspect, but they literally are responsible for and stewarding these animals that they become attached to. And so the notion that they, like you said, beat their animals and rape their animals, or don't even care and just see dollar signs, it's quite possibly the most ignorant statement that they could make.
Yeah, I think fair enough. I mean, and I've had the fortune and the pleasure to interact with a lot of ranches and go to ranches and see the stuff, and I've got very little concerns about that. I mean, I'm just happy they're willing to do the hard work, because it is a lot of hard work, and these guys are certainly underappreciated. Where do people find out what you're doing? Tell us about how to find information on you. Is it a YouTube channel, or you have a website, or what's the story on that?
Yeah, so on Twitter and Instagram is where I post a lot with just the Regenaissance. And then I'm also posting all of my tours, my podcast interviews, and all of that on my YouTube. And then I have a Substack to where I write a lot on just news going on, history, but then also just recent up-to-date news. And then lastly, my website, I have some apparel. It's organic cotton, and I truly believe it's the softest shirts you'll ever own. And there you can also find my newsletter, to where that's not just some salesy newsletter as well. That's another way to stay up to date on what's going on with our food, and just different types of other YouTube materials to also watch there. Because I try to just provide as much education and news as possible to stay up to date on everything.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, Ryan, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for doing what you're doing, and enjoy out in North Carolina, out there on the Outer Banks. I hear it's pretty out there. And, um, I wish you the best success, and hopefully people check out what you're doing. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you, Shawn. Thank you for having me.